Hello again, listeners. This is Zach from SPERDVAC, and welcome to Episode 2, or Episode 3, because we had a two-parter. But anyway, welcome to the latest edition of Behind the Dial, a lovely time dedicated to playing the presentations and interviews with legends of classic radio. Thanks to everybody who tuned in to the first two episodes of the program, and that wonderful rich time we had with George Balzer, the writer for the Jack Benny program. Other than talking to Jack himself, it's one of the best possible breakdowns you can ask for of how the Jack Benny show got made. So I hope it was as much fun for you to listen to that as it has been for me to listen to that. Now, some of these panels and interviews, like the George Balzer one, are ones that I've heard before and have benefited greatly from in terms of getting to learn some of the inside secrets of how a radio show gets made. But I'm going to make sure to also discover things for myself so that you can discover along with me. That way we're on the same level, if that makes sense. I want us to be learning together, and I don't want this to be a tier system, so to speak. But for this week's show, rather than going to anything familiar, I did try to find something new that was pertaining to a heavy hitter familiar to radio fans, but also someone whose knowledge of the audible arts can come as an inspiration to any newcomer looking into how the business of audio drama or audio comedy is born and how does it grow during that short golden age in media. It so happens that the right person for this was once known as having played a left-handed guitar player. Get it? Right person, left-handed. Whatever. Well, all the jokes can't be good. You got to expect that once in a while. I speak, of course, of Elliott Lewis. To comedy fans, he was a constant staple on the Jack Benny program, the Phil Harris Alice Faye Show, Parky Carcass, Burns and Allen, and so on and so forth. But this gifted talent made his mark in a more profound manner when he showed off his talents in creating and assembling a show and not just being behind the mic to perform it, whether that's his own creations or his stewardship of more established programs. His talents were so good that when he took over the directorship of the program Suspense after William Spear, he would be directing episodes that would carry fond memories for the ones who listened to them to this very day. And in fact, his talents in direction managed to produce some interesting episodes of Suspense that contained actors known much more for comedy, whether they be Phil Harris, Jim and Marion Jordan, or Jack Benny. His other efforts range the gamut, too, with other endeavors such as On Stage, Broadway is My Beat, and many more that helped elevate the art form and grasp brilliant performances and atmosphere all in the midst of the medium of radio losing its importance in terms of a pop culture landscape. So he was perfecting the art along with some other folks in that era. Thankfully, though, his talent did not just fade into memory when the majority of the golden age of radio was faded out, because it was folks like him that were called upon and acted upon, making sure that the audible arts didn't only survive but continued to thrive by any means necessary. The major triumph of that would be an anthology series called the Sears Radio Theater, which went on from 79 to 81. And Lewis will mention this show from time to time in the presentation that we're about to share. Before we get to that, though, I will say that anybody here who's listening and is trying to create audio drama for themselves, listen carefully. There is a wealth of inspiration and practical advice that will be not only relatable, but also affirming. So just keep your ears open. I promise you it will be worth it. So without further ado, let's go back to July 14th, 1979, and spend some time with Elliott Lewis.
This is a real special occasion for all of us today to have Mr. Lewis join us and tell about those golden days of radio and his part in them. It's a real treat, especially when we have someone of his stature who did so much for radio, and I say that sincerely because everything Mr. Lewis gave, he did well, like comedy, drama, producing, and directing. And I'm sure there isn't a program that he did in the golden days of radio that we didn't find probably the most interesting in our collections. He all made us richer in the programs and the diverse type of programs that he gave us. I'm sure all of us have favorites out there, whether it was his producing and directing of Broadway's My Beat, Kathy and Elliott Lewis on Stage, The Scarlet Queen, Hawk Larrabee, Phil Harris and Alice Faye, and many other programs that he did, specials, one-time programs, and so on. I thought to introduce our guests and get us into the mood of the program for this afternoon, we would play a couple of excerpts. I found it rather hard to pick the best of Elliott Lewis because he did so much so well. So I pulled three series that I'm rather fond of myself, and I think all of us have a place for. We'll start with the first one, which is rather interesting. A lot of collectors ask when we get together and have a discussion, well, who's your favorite radio actor? I know that when I'm asked that question, I have to give it a lot of thought because there were so many that did so much to make those programs as great as they were, and I'm sure you'll all agree. In this program, we're going to hear an excerpt from Hawk Larrabee from 1947, and you're going to hear three of the best in this excerpt, and then I'll be back in a minute.
When Brazos and I walked into the marshal's office, Brannigan was already there with Bleaktop and McMaster.
I told Brannigan here what's happened, Hawk. If you're accusing him, lay your cards on the table.
I'm still building my hand, Bleaktop. But meantime, I got two aces to show. One, Brannigan is the only one who stands to lose money. Maybe every cent he's got if a church gets started in Silver Bow. Two, my dad told me before he died that Utah Brannigan was run out of Modoc City by the church back there. And that Brannigan swore he'd never leave himself open to the same risk again.
Now, look, Larrabee, I admit a church would cut into my business, but I wouldn't stake myself out against it, especially the rough way it's being done. The gold bar house will get by, church or no church.
Well, that's a fine-sounding line of chin music.
I haven't finished yet, Larrabee. I was run out of Modoc City, yeah. But by a rival gambling outfit, not by the church.
Well, you just a lying skunk. I done some riding down Modoc City way myself, and the facts is like Hawk's papa told him.
And I'll get my proof, Brannigan. A man who's yellow enough to hire pack rats to do his dirty work will be yellow enough to get down on his knees when the going gets rough and talk to save his neck.
Well, don't forget, you were the one seen at the church this afternoon, Larrabee. And maybe trying to put it on me proves you're the one who's yellow.
Not in my office, Larrabee. Get your hands off him. You put that gun away, Brazos, John.
Well, we're getting no place fast around here, I can see that.
Well, somebody's got to pay for what's been done. Somebody's guilty.
Yeah, you're right, McMasters. I think I can clear the air, at least so far as I'm concerned. Here you are, Larrabee. I'm handing you $5,000 in cash. Go on, take it.
Keep talking, Brannigan.
Now, I ain't patient like Hawk. Give me that dinero. Now you can proceed with the details, Brannigan.
Well, that's hardly the church spirit grabbing like that, Brazos. I was about to say I'm giving that money to Larrabee as trustee to build the finest church in the West, right here in Silver Bow. That ought to make my position clear, Marshal.
Trying to buy off cheap, Brannigan. Didn't hear anything about your agreeing to stop working undercover against the church.
I'll assume that, Hawk. You see that there's a church built, and when it is, I'll consider the whole case closed.
Lewis did, The Voyage of the Scarlet Queen. How unfortunate it was only on radio for one season. I picked an excerpt here once again with Barton Yarborough, and I think you'll enjoy it. It was one of the best adventure action programs, I think, in radio's history.
Austin's house was still lighted when we got there. The main room still cluttered by the table full of food, the refuse left by the people who'd been there. Gallagher and Mangan started through the place looking for Galter. Austin, Loretta, and I stayed in the big room to watch the exit. It was about 5 minutes after the search started that we heard Mangan flush him.
Heads up, everybody. Here it comes.
I moved toward the door that led from the long hallway. I heard him running toward me. Then when he broke from the doorway, I made a short 10-foot rush. I hit him from his left, my right shoulder driving into his legs just above the knees so that my body swung in front of him and he crashed over me. Oh, the bruises gun barrel had left behind my ear got bumped in the first impact. And with the anger the pain brought me, I let him up. Stood back, then went in again to regain the face I'd lost when he gun whipped me.
Well, doggone. You get yourself into a temper when you get to going, don't you?
Watch it, Mangan. You don't come out of it for a while either.
Bill, darling, are you all right?
Get away from me! Leave me alone!
Bill!
You can kill him yourself. I've had enough of him.
Captain, when the final accounting is made,
Shut up!
Oh, calm down, Skipper. You've had your fun. He slugged me, too, and I didn't even get a crack at him.
Sorry, Red. Well, who's doing the bargaining now?
I've tried, Phil, but if you'll let me, I'd like to try again.
All right, if you want to do something, go mix me a drink.
It shows the comedy talent of Mr. Lewis. Let's join two fellows talking on the Bing Crosby Show.
I keep telling you, Frankie, I gotta get you a job. Don't you see, living under our roof, eating our food, wearing my clothes, taking cigarette money from Alice? You're gonna lose your self-respect. It's only gonna hurt you.
Don't worry about it, Curly. I can take it.
That's the trouble. You can take it faster than me and Alice can make it.
This don't sound like you, Curly. Has Alice been picking on me again?
Well, do you blame her? Alice didn't mind feeding you or clothing you, but, well, like that day you went to the racetrack, that really burned her up.
Well, a guy goes nuts not working. I had to have some recreation.
I know, Frankie, but borrowing money on our furniture.
All right, I was wrong, but did Alice have to carry on so?
Well, women are funny, you know that.
Yeah.
When she heard about it, she started to cry and ran upstairs and threw herself on the bed. That's when she really got mad.
Why?
The bed wasn't there. Can't you understand, Remley? It's not that we don't love you or we don't like having you for a house guest, but now you've moved in permanently.
Well, you and Alice always wanted a son.
Look, Junior, we want the kind that plays This Little Piggy Went to Market, not This Little Pony Went to the Post.
All right, all right.
When I talk about wanting a son, I mean a little baby I can play with. Someone I can pick up off the floor and teach how to walk.
Well, we've only tried that a few times, Curly. Give me another chance.
I keep telling you it ain't gonna work. Now, look, Alice says if you come home with me one time again, she leaves. So it's either you or Alice. And naturally, you know the decision I have to make.
Yeah. But don't worry about it. I know dames. Alice will come crawling back to us on her hands and knees.
Look, you got to get a job of your own. I keep trying to tell you I'm sick and tired of you depending on me.
What do you mean, dependent on you? I've been out working. How about them shoelaces? Didn't I go selling shoelaces from door to door?
Yeah, you went from my front door to my back door.
Well, that's door to door.
And big-hearted me. I get stuck with a pair of orange shoelaces.
Well, they look pretty, don't they?
On blue shoes? Them ain't even my school colors. Look, I'm going to get you some work. Now, look, I'm going in to talk to Bing, but I want to talk to Bing alone first. Now, wait out here, and I'll talk to him.
Right.
I'll see if I can break the ice.
Well, I'll see if I can get some white rock.
I didn't mean that. Now, wait out here. Hiya, John.
Hello, Phil.
Say, John, I don't want to take a lot of your time either, but I guess you know what I'm here for. You see, Frankie needs work. Now, do you want to help him?
I'm always willing to give anyone a chance, Phil. Of course, in my band, all the boys read music.
If I ever catch one of my guys reading while he's supposed to be working, out he goes.
Hey, Phil, why don't you let Frankie speak for himself?
Yeah, Curly. What is it you want to know, Mr. Trotter?
Can you read music?
Fluently.
Lay it on him, Frank.
All right, I'm not going to put anybody on the spot here. I dislike doing it, but Frankie, here's a sheet of music. Let's see if you can read the first line.
Okay. 2 black dots, a circle, 4 black dots, a circle with a line through it, 4 black dots.
There you are. Attaboy, Frankie.
I'm very flattered that you asked me here, and thank you for playing those. I've never thought of myself as an actor, and it always surprises me when I hear myself performing, because it always sounds like somebody else. I can't really relate to it. I can relate to Remley because that was such fun. That spot, isn't that from the Crosby thing we did in San Francisco? I remember the show because we had such a good time doing it, and I remember it also because we spread 14 minutes. They had to cut all of the musical numbers out of it. I think there's only one musical number left in the show. They had nowhere to cut. And it just was one of those things that happened. This one, incidentally, I don't think this show was written by Dick and Ray. I think this was Bob Fisher and can't remember the other guys, but they were people who normally worked with Bing. And they had a real feel for the characters, and it all worked well. the first thing, the Hawk thing, is interesting because I did Hawk first, and then Bart did it. I went on to something else, and that always surprised me because the most unlikely acting job I can think of to assign me to would be a Western hero. And I knew so little about it. I have to tell you something funny that happened. I was playing very, very seriously. I was trying very hard to stay into character, and there was a line that they had written. I think Ejac was writing a great many of these, and he'd written the line that was supposed to be real Western stuff, and I read it as well as I could, and everybody fell apart. And what you will hear, and then you'll fall apart, and then I will tell you how it's spelled on the page, and I didn't see anything funny. And somebody says something or other to Hawk, and Hawk says, okay, I'll be back, so-and-so, and he says, where are you going? And Hawk says, I have to go outside and swab out my Bronx nose. Well, BRONC''S is what real Western talk, and nobody heard that. The Scarlet Queen is an interesting example of sound effects and everything. We did the Queen for, I think we did 26 shows. And the group that got together to do Scarlet Queen was a group that was in the Army together at Armed Forces Radio. And what we tried to do was really sound like the boat. With 3 sound men. We had one of the mutual studios, I would guess about as big as this room. And about yay big was for the actors, and this much for Dick Orant and the organ and 3 instruments or whatever he was using. All the rest of it was sound effects. We had pieces of canvas and sides of timber, all kinds of things, and 3 guys going. Jimmy Burton was the director of the show, and Orant did it. And when you remarked about the narration sounding like some of the Spade stuff, it's because Gil Dowd wrote both of them. And Gil had started here as a sound man in the old KHJ days, when KHJ was down at 7th and Bixel. And then he went up to San Francisco. I guess he was working up there after the war. He'd been in the Merchant Marine. And then he wrote for the Jack Webb thing in San Francisco. What was the name of that? Pat Novak, yeah. And then when it came down here, it was called Pier something. Johnny Madero, right. And then Gil came back down with it when he was married to Annie. What do you want to know is the best thing? I don't know what to really... Yeah.
How'd you get along with the real figure?
Very well. That was very funny. When Phil and Alice started the show, Phil had an idea that he was going to do a comedy show. He had Walter Scharf doing the music. Walter had been Alice's accompanist when she was singing on dates and clubs and so on. And Walter put the orchestra together. Walter is an exceptionally well-trained musician, and he'd studied at Juilliard, and he had all of that kind of background. And Phil, we're doing a comedy show. Well, they were doing. I wasn't a part of it. And they wanted to use Remley in it, and they had Remley playing Remley. And it was a disaster, because Frank would just come on and talk, and the character had been so well established on the Benny show, although he never spoke, but you heard him laughing, and he'd fall apart, and he didn't put it on the laugh. He just was a very dear man who enjoyed it, and he was left-handed, so he played this way. And I don't know anything about playing the guitar. I know something about music, and I had studied a little bit of music and had some kind of background, but I don't know how to play a guitar. Anyway, I had known Phil because I used to work on the Benny show as an actor, and Phil and I knew one another, and I was also working on Sundays. Sundays were very busy. Phil was on Sunday, and Jack was on Sunday, and then John, Passing Parade was on Sunday, and then Harry Einstein, Park Your Carcass, had a show on Sunday. And I remember once, I was so dumb that it never occurred to me to be nervous, that from 4 to 4:30, I did the Benny show from what is now KHJ on Melrose, which was then NBC. And from 4:30 to 5, this is before Phil went on, from 4:30 to 5, I did Passing Parade with John Nesbitt at CBS, up at the corner of Gower and Sunset. So I parked my car in front of KHJ, which was then NBC, and did the Benny show, and finished the show, and we all took our bows. And while they were doing commercials, Don was doing the closing commercial, and then they do the station break. I strolled out of the building and got in my car and started the motor and drove up Gower and pulled into the parking lot behind KNX and took one script out of my pocket and put the other script in and walked into the studio. As they were completing the opening commercial on Passing Parade, and it never occurred to me that the car wouldn't start or that there would be an accident. All these shows are live. And you just stroll around and did all of the shows. Anyway, when Phil started the show, so I was wandering around then. Everybody was. Sundays, live shows, and you just went from one place to another. Everything was going. And I was doing something, I guess the Parkey show at NBC. Every once in a while I worked with Parkey. I think that was at 3 o'clock, and Phil was on at 4. And one day, Phil had been on 1 week or 2 weeks, I don't recall. But I came out of the Parkey show, and he grabbed me, and he said, would you do me a favor next week? And I said, yeah. And he said, Remley just doesn't sound right. Will you read Remley? And I said, yeah, okay. So the following week, after I finished Parkey, I went over and I did Remley. And I remember the first show, I think it was the first one that I did, was somebody asked Phil where he had met Remley. And he described this insane scene where he was in New Orleans, and a beggar on a street corner, and that was supposedly how he met. Sir, can you give me a dime for a cup of coffee kind of stuff? And I think that was the first show that we did together, and it got yells. And Phil said, well, you want to do it again next week? And I said, well, yeah, let's see what happened. So Remley said, well, you know, if you're going to walk out there and you're a guitar player, you really ought to know how to hold the guitar anyway. And they had written a spot about Remley doing, the only song he knew was You Are My Sunshine. So Frankie said, here, hold it this way, I'll take 2 strings off. Now, fortunately, the guitar was already strung for a left-hander. It was strung upside down. Otherwise, you'd be playing this way. It's hard enough to play this way, you know. So he took the top 2 strings, it had 6 strings, he took 2 strings off so I wouldn't have that much trouble fingering. He taught me 2 chords, which I screwed up on the air, because I couldn't remember where to put my hand. And did You Are My Sunshine, that was on the second show. Or maybe You Are My Sunshine is how anyway, it was in one of the first 2 shows. And after the second show got all of the laughs, Pat Weaver was in NBC then. And Pat called and said, gee, that sounds really good. Why don't you guys work something out? And we were together for 9 years, and we did the show. And in all of that time, in the 9 years, Alice Faye, who ended up saying at the beginning, what are you guys going to do now? If you do that, I'm really going to be mad. And then disappeared and came back at the end and said, well, okay, I forgive you. Never complained, and she was the only reason we were on the air. Because they bought the name, they bought the star. Most gracious, lovely lady, you know. And Phil would give me all of the laughs. I had all the jokes, time it any way I want, as we did on the Benny thing. Stand there for half an hour. Nobody would interrupt. You know. But those were marvelous. I loved doing that. But the other acting stuff wasn't. There's a funny thing when you're talking about the old shows in the old days. And I mentioned when KHJ was at 7th and Bixel. My first job was down there. I was still in school at City College. And I was in a radio class because I had been invited, everybody in the campus was invited to audition for a new class they were going to give in radio acting. And I had done some acting as a youngster in Mount Vernon, New York, where I was raised. And I had been in a little theater group there called the Barnstormers with Joan Tompkins and the Carney brothers, Art, and who were the others? I just got a letter from, I think there was John, Jack. And there was one who was director, Don. Anyway, the whole group of them. We all were in this little group together. And so when I came out here to go to school, hoping to study law, I came to California because I couldn't afford to go to a big university, and the tuition at City College at that time for out-of-state residents was $75, so it worked out fine. Anyway, I got involved in this audition and got in the class, but I was working in the music, I was in the music department and studying pre-law, And there was a guest speaker at the class one day, and he invited everybody in the radio class to come down to KHJ and audition for a commercial job. And I wasn't there. I missed it. So his name was True Boardman. So I called True on the phone, and I introduced myself, and he said, well, you shouldn't miss the audition. Come on down. We'll audition you. And I went down the next day, and he gave me a job on a, don't even remember what show it was. I think it was The Life of Simon Bolivar. And I think I had 3 lines, but the biggest thing I had to do was they had a rack for those kind of chairs. And in the earthquake sequence, I was to shake the rack as hard as I could and yell, earthquake, earthquake, which I did, and it was on Coast to Coast, and I got a letter from my mother and dad in Mount Vernon, New York. They enjoyed it very much. And then I started working, and in the room at the boarding house where I lived, the room next to mine was one of my music teachers. Very nice man. And he came in one day and he said, you might want to go back to college one day. Do you know you haven't been to school in 4 months? And I'd been working. And I said, no, is it 4 months? I hadn't realized. And he said, go on over and withdraw. Otherwise, you're going to flunk everything. And if you ever want to go back to school, you're going to have that on your record. And it's going to look like you're a real dummy, which I was. So I withdrew from everything and then started working fairly regularly. And here I am. A year ago, June, I really was most anxious to come here today because I wanted to thank all of you for your support on Sears Radio Theater. Just to give you a brief history, a year ago, this past June, last month, I was invited to meet some people at lunch. And I was introduced to 2 very tall people, a man named John Beebe and a woman named Ingrid Carlson. And they said, we want to do a radio show 5 nights a week, different type of show every night, different host every night. And we have all 3 networks interested. And would you be interested in being in charge of this program? You can do whatever you want. So I said, the worst thing that can happen, which I've said a million times, the worst thing that can happen to you in show business is that you're a hit. Because then you get stuck with something that you hate, and every day you have to get up and do something you really loathe. And this might work, so I better think about it. So I went home, and Mary and I talked it over, and we said, well, we'll give it a shot and see what happens. And I was in the middle of writing some scripts at Warner's, television scripts, and I had a book that a publisher wanted to buy with an option for a second book, novel. But I called these people and I said, okay. From that start, which was, what are you going to need to do this? And I said, a place to sit down, a typewriter, yellow paper, pencils, telephones, somebody to type the scripts, writers, actors, sound effects, studio, and so on. As of this moment, as of yesterday noon, we are on a network of 194 radio stations. We will be finishing the originals. We have completed recording 130 original radio dramas, 80% of which were written by people under the age of 35 who not only had never written a radio show before, we had to show them what the form of a script was. They had never heard a radio show before. Nelson Riddle has written 130 scores, and I was told on Friday that it looked almost certain that we would be renewed for a second year because of your support and mail and coming to the Morgan show and helping us out like you did. The first 8 markets that they have gotten any news about listeners, Sears Radio Theater has increased the listeners in those first markets 56%. So radio is no longer something that you can you don't have to any longer just remember the old days. There are now new days of radio and new stuff thanks to all of you. And it looks like it will continue if we can all stay awake long enough. Anyway, it looks very good, and we should know in a couple of weeks, and then when you call, I should know we can get something going there, Jim. What would you like to know? Yeah.
You learned your craft before the best and biggest producer-directors in radio, Norman Corwin, Art Schoedler, Bill Spear, and Bill Robeson. Working under them, what did you remember when it became your turn to produce and direct radio?
I remember that probably the first person I remember when I think of learning anything is Jack Benny, because Jack, when I was still in school and I had parts on the Benny Show, he was the most supportive, best teacher, best audience, least amount of ego man that I ever knew in my whole life. If you got a laugh on the Benny Show where he didn't expect it, he sent you an extra check, which was very nice when you were still in school, you know. When I was 19, I think, and did the Benny Show, he did me the great honor of letting me time the joke. He didn't put a protection well to time the laugh. He let me time the laugh. And I didn't know what he was doing until years later, and somebody said to me, you know what he did for you? And then I appreciated it. I think I told you before, I recall an instance on the Harris Show. Jack was still in NBC because he hadn't moved over to CBS yet. So both shows were on NBC. I guess Phil went 4 to 4:30 and Jack went Jack went 4 to 4:30. And whatever the first ones were. Fitch Bandwagon, I guess. Yeah. And we went 4:30 to 5. Anyway, we were all sitting in the lobby waiting to go on and go out and do our shows, live shows one day. And you heard the kind of laughs Phil and Remley got. And it's great material, just marvelous material we were doing. And we were good, we did it well. But the laugh was bigger than the material, and it seemed to me, listening to it, bigger than what we were doing. And I said to Jack, I don't know what they're laughing at. I know the joke is funny, and I know we're doing the joke right, but I can't, why is the building shaking? The laugh is so enormous. And he said, what you guys say under the condition that exists in the story is what everyone in that audience would like to say if they had the nerve. And that's what they're laughing at, you know. I always remembered that, and the biggest lesson I ever, and it can be costly, but it's worth it. Jack said to me, because I was also writing and producing and directing, and he said, I have to tell you something. Never do the same thing every week. Even if it's lousy, it's better than doing the same thing every week. Continue to take chances. Make yourself take chances. And I was thinking about it as we were winding up the first Sears year, 130 shows. And I had to remind myself all through the year as we talked to writers to take chances. If the writer said, I have an idea and it seemed like a good idea, take a chance. Another lesson is Desi Arnaz saying to me, the only thing you have to protect is never do a lousy show. You'll have good shows and bad shows, and some are better, and maybe a couple of them will be excellent. But never do a lousy show. As a result of which, I think on the Sears thing this year, on balance, 130 shows, we have done better, quality-wise, than television, than movies, than the publishing business, and then the New York theater, in terms of what those writers, the material those writers have turned into us during the year. I remember from Spear, Corwin really isn't a director. I would say it to his face. Norman knows what he wants his material to sound like. Arch is a good director. Spear was brilliant. Spear was a child prodigy in music. Spear could write. I remember one day going over to his house, we were working on some script. I don't remember what it was. And he wanted me to rewrite it, and I did the revision on it, and then he said, no, there's some things we can fix. And he was a great fixer. He loved to fool around and fix words and lines. He'd spend hours on it. And somehow or other we stopped and we were going to have a cup of coffee or whatever. And we started talking about music. And I had recently heard a new recording of Boris Godunov. And I mentioned this, and Spears said, "Oh, yeah." And he walked over. There were he was married to Kay Thompson at the time. There were two grand pianos in the living room so that they could play two piano stuff. And he sat down and he started to, at the one of the pianos, and he started to play Boris Godunov. And he played the whole first scene, not looking at any music. And he got finished, and I said, "God, that's marvelous. I didn't know that you had been studying that." He said, "I haven't played that since I was 17 years old." But I mean all of the stuff. Fabulous man, fantastic man. But, I don't know, you learn, I hope you learn from everybody. The most important thing you learn, or should learn, is how dumb you are, and how little you know, and how many people there are around that can help you if you just say, "Hey, how do you do this?" You know. That's why I was looking at that. Is that attached? Does that tape machine, does the Sony work off of another thing, or is that self-contained? Oh, it is plugged. I was looking around. You used to be able to just buy a reel-to-reel tape machine all by itself. I don't know that anybody doesn't make that anymore, do they? Huh? Do they? Where do you go to get those? People keep sending me tapes, and I haven't got any place to play them. An actor sends me a tape and says, "You know, I hope you enjoy this," and I can't play it. Yeah.
Could you tell us something about Manhattan Towers and maybe decide, have you ever thought about maybe adapting it this year? Probably about the same, about right timeline. You know,
I think Gordon would like to do it. It would be very expensive. It's a very strange story how that happened. I was in the Army, World War II. I went to a dinner party, and Gordon was one of the guests at the dinner, and I'd known him for years. And he came over to me, he said, "I wrote an album, and Carlton Young is doing the narration." And he said, "The damnedest thing happened today." He said, "I went over and I played it for these people, and he said they didn't like Carlton." So I said, "Well, why not?" And he said, "I don't know." He said, you want to do it?" And I said, "What is it?" And he said, "It's an album, and you talk, and the music plays and everything." And I said, "I'm in the Army. I can't do an album." So he said, "Ask Tom." I was head of the department I was in, so I could pretty well organize. As long as I turned out 128 shows a week, they didn't care what else I did. So I got Duff to wake up one morning and come in and cover for me, which was more difficult than doing the album. And Howie agreed that he'd get up and he'd come in and he'd run the office from 8 to 12, if I'd be back at 12:30. And I went over to the old RCA studios on Sycamore, just below Santa Monica. They used to have recording studios there. And I went over at 8 o'clock, and Gordon gave me the manuscript, and the orchestra and the chorus was there. And at noon, he gave me a check for $250 and said, "Thank you very much." And I said, "Thank you." And I was stone broke. I was in the Army. I didn't have anything. This was just before Christmas. So I had $250, and wow, everybody had Christmas, you know. And that's how we did Manhattan Tower. There was a photographer came running in and said, "We need a publicity picture," and I was in uniform. So Gordon gave me his shirt, and I put his shirt on over my uniform shirt, and that was Manhattan Tower. Then when I was working for Pat Weaver at NBC, Pat said, "Wouldn't it be a good idea if we did Manhattan Tower as a special?" So I said, "Yeah, does Gordon want to do it?" He said, "Gordon's written a script, and he made it longer, and the whole other thing." So Gordon started working on it, and Pat said, "You kind of be the executive and look it over." And Gordon said, "Look, as long as we're doing it, why don't we do another album?" And I said, "Not for $250. So he said, "Well, okay, I'll give you a piece of it." And I said, "Okay." And we did that one for Capitol. Now, that time, it took three 3-hour sessions. And he'd made it longer, and Beverly was, Mrs. Jenkins, Beverly Moore, was still there. And then Bill, singer, can't think of his name. Bill Lee did the singing. Pardon? And Shirley, yeah, that was the joke we were doing, was that Bill went places and said that I was speaking for him, and I went places and said he was singing for me. And Beverly said Shirley was speaking for her, and Shirley said Beverly is doing my singing, you know. But we did it in the 3 sessions and wrapped it up, and then they did it, really separated the tracks. They had us in another room wearing phones, because then they took the whole thing, I understand, to Munich or somewhere and put a German narration in and German lyrics to the songs and so on. But how long ago was that? I was at NBC. Pat Weaver was at NBC, the Capitol album. And I ran into Gordon, and he said they just recently reissued it, and that, which explains, but even without the reissue, since that album was made, every 6 months I get a check from Capitol. I don't mean a check, I mean a check. The last one I got was for $6. But you know, you get a $6 check, and then one period is one was for $23, and I've never been able to figure it out anyway. I don't understand record royalties. You get 3/4 of 1% of 90% of less than some percent for breakage. And I remember asking someone how they broke those things, and that they still call it breakage from when they were records that you broke. You know, you can't break them anymore. But that's how we did the Tower. But then the Tower made somebody at CBS, Manny, the head of CBS Records, Klein. No, is it Manny Klein? No, what was his name? Right. No, this is Manny. He since has passed away. Nice man. He was head of Columbia Records, and he did the same job for RCA, for Victor Records for a while. Anyway, he had a notion that Ray Noble and I should do an album, because I'd had an idea. It's when I was married to Kathy. And I wrote an album, and Ray and I worked on it, and we recorded it at the Huntington Hartford Theater. And Manny came out, and we finished recording the 8 sides, and he said, "Can I buy all of you a little supper?" And we said, "Yeah, fine." And we went next door to Abe Lyman's. And I remember sitting at the back table. Ray's sitting here, Kathy's sitting here, Manny's sitting there. Manny said, "That's a good album. Would you guys like to do another?" And I looked at Ray, and he blinked, and I said, "Yes, it's all written and just getting ready to go." I forget which one was first, whether it was Holidays or Anniversary. Whichever, well, let's say Anniversary was first, Happy Anniversary. And he said, "What is it?" And I said, Happy Holidays. And Ray said, "Yes, Happy Holidays." And he said, "What's it about?" And I said, "Well, it's the same." And I ad-libbed a whole album. We were sitting there, and he said, "Well, when are you going to record it?" And I said, "When are we going to record it, Ray?" And he said, "I haven't finished the score. You said you were going to make some changes in the 3rd scene." And I said, "Oh, yes, that's right. I forgot to make those changes in the 3rd scene." So Ray said, "So then I have to write the score. It'll be about 3 or 4 weeks, Manny." And Manny said, "That's all right." And picked up the check, and we said goodnight to him, and Ray said, "What are you writing?" And I said, "I don't know." So I went home and started writing holidays, thinking of things, and he'd get me on the phone and say, "You know, a good song for such and such a holiday," and that's how we did the albums. Those were fun. And I'd completely forgotten about the 2 albums, and with the Sears things, a lot of publicity goes on, a lot of people calling stuff. And I got a phone call at the office from a guy at big St. Louis station, CBS. Who's from St. Louis? KMOX. And this guy introduced himself, nice man, I don't know his name, and he said, "Can I call you later in the day, and would you do a live interview about Sears?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, fine." Call me at the office, and we made a phone date. And he called me and said, "Hang on, and I'll be with you in 30 seconds or whatever." And then I heard he plugged in the line so I could hear him doing his broadcast. And he introduced me, and he said, "You're on the air," and we started talking. And he said, no, the introduction was, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce somebody that you're all of you radio fans are familiar with." So I know right away he's going to talk about Remley or he's going to talk about Manhattan Tower, right? He said, "You're all familiar with him because on all of the holidays we play his album." And I said, I'm on the air with this man. And he said, "I'd like to ask him now on the air, when is CBS going to re-release Happy Holidays and Happy Anniversary, because here at KMOX St. Louis, that's the most popular records that we spin here at so-and-so and so-and-so." So I said, I don't know what I have to pay you for what you just said, but, are you putting me on, or is that for real, or whatever? And he still plays those albums. I'd forgotten all about them. I don't even know where he got the copies. I have a copy, but I didn't know anybody else in the world had it. You had your hand up.
Yeah. What happened to 0 hour? It started with the five-part stories, and then went a half hour?
It started with the 5-part stories, which was Kolos's idea, Jay Kolos, when he hired me to do it, and we did those, and it was to be syndicated, and I'll be as candid as I can be. They said, we're going to stop production for a while because we need some backing, and I said, okay, and they called up and they said, we're going to be on Mutual now. We've sold the package to Mutual, and then I said, swell, and then I never heard another word. So I called a friend of mine who knew something about it and said, what happened? And they said, well, they figured out, they watched you, and it seemed like you'd read a script, and then you make a couple of marks on the page with your pencil, and then you made a couple of phone calls, and there were actors there, and then you kind of pointed to people every once in a while, and they looked at the money they were paying you to do this, and they figured they could do it, so they took the money and they're doing it. They're not doing it. The show got canceled. It looks easy, but it's not. Yeah, they cut it to a half hour, and they played. The unions got after him. Everybody started hitting him. They started repeating him and not paying for the repeats, doing all kinds of stuff. And they really cracked down on him. But, it's a terrible thing. We were talking about this the other day. There's nothing wrong, really, with what they did, except that they lacked what we were talking about before. They lacked the wisdom to say that if they didn't know about something, they ought to ask somebody who did know. I write primarily, and I think of myself as a writer. The first thing I ever bought myself when I was 17 was a typewriter. And now I have a novel coming out, so it didn't take too long. We have a housekeeper. When I'm writing at home, she will go over to my wife and say, he's really working. I can hear the typewriter. Well, that isn't when you're working. When you're working is before the typewriter, because you don't know what you're going to write, So that people wander around. I remember when I was producing the Lucy show, and she'd look at me, the way she does all the time. And I'd known her for, God knows, all of our lives. And we've had terrible fights. She wanted to be her leading man once in radio, and I said, I wouldn't act with you for, She threw me off the lot once and said, I want you off this lot in 15 minutes. And I said, I can't leave. I'm working for the other guy that rents space here. So it's always been that kind of a relationship. But she was watching me one day, and I was kind of strolling down the street, and I stopped to talk to somebody, and I was chatting, and we were kind of talking about things. Nobody was raising their voice, and when this man left, who happened to be the art director, and we were discussing how the set on the next week's show was going to be built and how much space we needed and so on to do certain tricks. I think it was the stilt show, and the upper berth has to be at exactly the right height. Anyway, whatever it was. She came over to me, and she got very angry, and she said, I don't think you work hard enough. And I said, wait a minute, we're not going to talk about that. Because you do a terrible thing. And she said, what's that? And I said, you make synonymous motion and work. You think if somebody's yelling a lot, they're doing something. And that they don't have anything to do with each other. Everybody has their own work habits. I work very quietly. And that's what happened to the Kolos show. To 0 hour. I'm sitting there with a pencil, but I'm rewriting a script if I do this every once in a while. If I'm sitting this way, I'm usually casting, trying to figure out what's wrong with the second act, doing something. Just to sit there and go this way, which they thought would be working, had nothing to do with it. So they assumed, therefore, they do what I did without knowing what I did. So what they did, that I did, was to do what I was doing externally, which was doing this, or doing this every once in a while, or picking up the phone and saying, and they hear this end of the conversation, Barney, you doing anything Tuesday? Yeah, 9 o'clock. Okay. I figured, hell, what's that? You know, if I find out who Barney is, you know, I can make the same phone call. But yeah.
I just wanted to say that, you know, when the Zero Hour went to Mutual, the two big mistakes they made, maybe one of them was their phone. They used television people instead of radio people for the leads. And the show was 25 minutes long. They had 5 2-minute spots, so the story ran 15 minutes.
You can't do a story. No. But that was Mutual that did that then. Jay wouldn't have done that. But you know, a terrible thing, and you have to insist upon it, you have to be nasty. If you're in creative control, you have to be in creative control. Whatever happened, I'm pleased that the Sears thing worked. But my letter of agreement said I was in complete and absolute creative control of everything. So that if they say, I got a note from them once and they said, kill this script. One note happened once. And I called them back and said, you can't say kill this script. You have to tell me why. You know, this is not something that we just make up, and it's you can't work that way. So at a meeting, I explained to them that there are only really 3 precious things in that business. And the first was the idea, and the second was time, and the third was money. And if they had a script there, and they said, kill this script, they weren't observing any of the 3 things. There was some reason, you know. There's an old saw about there's nothing wrong with tearing down a fence, but the wise man will first inquire why it was put up, because it may be that there's no longer a reason for the fence, but it may also be, if you don't ask the question, that you're letting loose a bunch of saber-toothed tigers, you know. So ask the question. But these people somehow don't ask the question. And it's stupidity. Everybody, no matter what it is you do, you know how to do it. And you know how to do it well, or you wouldn't be doing it. You would have been thrown out of it a long time ago. Everybody here does something and does something well. And for somebody like the guy at Mutual or Kolos is a great advertising man. I would no more think of walking in and running his advertising agency. I don't know anything about an advertising agency, but somehow or other the creative part of the business drives people up the wall because they can't stand it. I don't know if it's jealousy or what it is. It just annoys the devil out of them that people make a living by going this way and then doing this and then calling Barney to see what he's doing at 9 o'clock. And they don't understand the shorthand, and they make the terrible mistake of not inquiring and not having an appreciation of it. And within the business, within any business, you have the same thing, it seems to me. I have always felt that everybody in the entertainment business should know enough about every part of the entertainment business so that they respect what the other people are doing. Any actor who comes in and mutters about a script should be sat in front of a typewriter and put a piece of yellow paper in the typewriter and say, fade in, interior Lucy's living room day. She comes down the stairs, her hair in curlers. Go. Give me the other 32 pages, you know, and then argue about, is this a good script or a bad script? And conversely, the writer, who is, oh, these lines are so precious, should be made to stand in front of an audience and read aloud a bad joke and look like a fool, as the actor does, while the guy, you look into the wings and the writer just went, oh, well. Well, they go, right on, baby. And you're standing there with mud on your face. You know, you just made one of those big things, and nothing happened. And the writer's going, oh. You know. And then all of them should have to be with the director when he's trying to put all of this stuff together and have it make sense, and the actors are chatting away in the corner, you know, and the writers are in the back saying, they're not doing that line right. You really have to fix that line. They're not doing, you say, will you please shut up? Nobody's going to hear it. Nobody's going to hear your line. It's not an important line. He will do it. But please, everybody be quiet, you know. And then they should all have to face the producer, who, somebody asked me once to define what a producer does. And the only thing I could think of was to say that a producer is the person who's in charge of what's wrong. If it's a good performance, the actors all go and bow. If the script plays well, the writer takes a bow. If there are some intricate camera shots or some in radio, lovely sound patterns and music combinations, the director and everybody are going that way. But the slightest thing that's wrong. Bob Weisskopf said to me one day after a bad day on the Lucy show, when we started to walk to lunch and it started to rain, he said, "Now what have you done?" You know, that's anyhow. Anything else? Yeah.
How long does it generally take from the time that you request a script till it's completed, and then once you get it, about how long does it take to go over to get it like you, since you have complete control on it, until it's like you want it?
Well, it depends on the script. You know, I would say on average, like, writer comes in with a notion. Have you done a show about man in a balloon? No. I got an idea. Okay. Comes back for as long as it's taken him to do, let's say, 2 pages, which briefly tells what the story is, so you can see if there's anything wrong. Now we got the story, okay, let's go. And depending upon how quickly the writer works, you should have a script, a radio script I'm talking about now on Sears. You should have a script in a week to 2 weeks. Sometimes that first draft just works fine and you need just a couple of little changes. Sometimes it just doesn't work. It didn't work. You thought it did from the story, but it just didn't work. So you have to go back, and the writer goes back and does a heavy revision, which takes another week or so. If it does work, take the middle line, he makes his few changes, and then he turns it back to me. And then I'll do a little work on it, clean up obvious production things, clean up some dialogue, perhaps make some cuts, adjust what the host is going to say, put in some music things or sound things or whatever, and then it goes to Mimeo. So that the miracle is that I am standing here after having done that 130 times in this past 7 months, and then recorded them, called the actors and got the sound with Bud Tollefson, and then recorded the show, and then sat down with Nelson and discussed the kind of music, and then Nelson wrote the music, and then gone back to the studio and assembled the show with Art Gilmore's tracks, which had been gotten at a separate time, and the guest host tracks, which had been gotten at a separate time when we were fortunate enough to have the guest host in town. We had one place near the end of the season, I thought, we're never going to finish this. Cicely was in New York, Vinny was in Hong Kong, Andy was in North Carolina. Widmark had gotten so angry because at a picture company that left him on a Russian trawler somewhere in the Alaskan waters that he'd flown to London, then went to Connecticut and hid. And I had to get Howie Duff to come in and finish the season. Wid said, "I'm not going to do anything anymore. I'm just not going to do anything anymore." I said, "Well, okay." And Lorne, I don't know where I think he was in Hawaii, and we needed tracks from all of them. I mean, we had no tracks. We had nothing to assemble, and the shows had to be shipped on Saturday. And they all arrived within a day of each other. And poor Mark Trello was in there making copies, I thought the machine would blow up, of all of their material from each of the shows, and then we just kept dragging them in and got them, and we got everything. So that's the process of doing each of the shows. I sometimes remind myself, somebody said about Richard Burton, I think it was. He's the sort of man who, when you ask him for the time, tells you how to make a watch. You asked me how long it took to get a script in, and I just did a whole series of 130 shows. Yeah.
The 3 Morgan shows, did they go like that, or did he have more or less complete charge?
No, we didn't fool with those scripts at all. Whatever Henry wants to do is what you're going to do.
I mean, did you have good rehearsals, or did he just come on and boom, boom, boom?
No, we rehearsed. He had sent us the scripts. We had the scripts. They came in one at a time over a period of 3 months, probably. Marvelous material. Were you there at the shows?
No.
Well, what we did was turn the studio around so that we could have an audience, and most of you people were our audience. This is where we got an audience, because when we said to Paramount we're going to have an audience show, they said, well, our insurance doesn't cover anybody doing a radio show with an audience. So Kenny McManus, the associate director, said, no, you misunderstand. It's not a show. It's a little a gathering of people who are going to discuss comedy. And they said, oh, that's all right. So they knew what we were doing and they didn't care. They thought it was fine. Yeah.
What can you tell me about the sound effects? The series programs that I've listened to just don't have the same impact as the ones on the old radio. And that's
Well, it may be the ones you've heard didn't
have.
have. We're using the same sound man and the same effects. So Bud Tollefson's been doing this for 35 years. Did the sound on Dragnet, did all of those shows. Fibber's Closet, we're still using that track. We used it on a show the other day called Crown Jewels of Grandomere. And there's a fight in a living room, and Bud brought along the old recording of The Closet. So it's the same things. I wouldn't know how to answer that unless some of the quality is lost in transmission. The fact that we're not doing it live, that goes on to tape, and we're using a quality of tape, I don't know this much about the technical part of it, that fits the machines at CBS in New York. But as far as our engineers at the studio here at Glen Glen, they don't think it's satisfactory. They think that the top is cut off, and that may be what you're hearing, that you're not hearing a full line of stuff. I know in the old days, I'd get an effect in the booth, and the engineer would say, "I'm glad you like that, because you're never again going to hear it that way." And I didn't know what he meant until I found out about compressors and the fact that the high end of the spectrum is cut off and the low end is cut off, and then your radio doesn't pick it up and all of those things. Well, that was with a live show in the old days. We're still using these mics. We still use the ribbon mic because the ribbon mic allows an actor to be off mic without having to be 9 miles away. This sound, with me standing here, sounds like I'm way over there someplace, and then I can come around and get back on mic without having to come from the other end of the studio at a gallop. So we still use the old ribbons for the actors. I would guess the answer to your question, not being a technician, is that we're doing all the things we did before exactly the same way. So somewhere between the studio, the tape going through the CBS machines, I don't know if they're using lines now or satellite. Whatever it is, by the time it gets to your receiver, the thrill is gone, as they say. Yeah.
Can you detect any difference in feeling or method or attitude between doing the old shows back then and doing Sears now?
No, as a matter of fact, every day, as the actors come in, what they remark about is that this is just like the old days. And the actors that are talking about it are people who never did it before. They are now caught up in it. But we have so many kids working now, by kids to me, 25, 30, 35-year-old actors, and they're with the old-timers, and they're all there together, and they're doing the same thing now. They say, "Hey, how are you? Isn't this marvelous?" I think it's inherent in radio. Radio is a business where people love each other. They don't kill each other. They don't stick knives in backs. Everybody trusts one another. They share. It's like your group. They all have a good time, and they enjoy it, Yeah.
Are there some young people that can adapt to radio quickly than others?
Yeah, well, it's like any some people can adapt more. I think as far as acting goes, if you're a good actor, you can act anywhere as soon as you learn the techniques. There is a technique to being a radio actor. You have to be very facile. You have to be a quick reader. You have to be able to assume characters quickly. You have to be able to read and sound like you just thought of it, and not that you're reading something. As far as young people writing is concerned, young writers find when they write a radio show that they have a chance, finally, to write something that's going to be performed. When you write if I write a television script, 80% of what I write is a con job. I'm writing things that no more can be shot by a camera. We see in his eyes how much he misses his long-lost love. Well, come on. This is for some idiot who's reading it, and you want him to understand what the story is, but you can't shoot that. There's no way in the world you can shoot that. So what you're writing in a television script or a movie script is the story broken down into scenes, and you're saying where the scenes are to be shot, how the people are to be dressed, who is in the scenes, and then you're putting in some dialogue. All the rest of it, the director, the wardrobe, location, all of those people are going to do the rest of it. And the actors are going so fast they can't remember your lines anyway. You're lucky whatever you get if it makes sense. You say print it, next setup, You write a radio script, every word that you write, except where it says music bridge or sound, he walks over to the door, door opens, steps into room, close the door. Every other thing that you write is what you're going to hear when you go home and listen to your show being broadcast. And the young writers that come in just flip. They love it. They finally get a chance to write something. Also, in the world that we live in today, radio, Sears specifically, is their only market. There aren't magazines where you can sell. If you're a writer and you have a story, where are you going to sell it? There is no Saturday Evening Post or Collier's or any of those magazines. Television series, you have to adapt it so it fits Chips. If the motorcycle doesn't fall down and there's not a place where it can fall down, you can't write this. You have to change the story. You can't use it. But you can do all kinds of stories in radio, and then therefore it's a market, and there are plenty of writers available. We used 44 different writers this year, 183 different actors. Nelson used, I imagine he averages 4 musicians a day, is 20 musicians a week for 26 weeks. I haven't got my computer with me. I don't add good. Yeah.
When you have somebody that has written the script and is also playing in the story,
Like Shep?
Yeah, or Patricia Joyce, do they suggest what part that they have written for themselves, or do you
No,
cast?
no. If Fletcher calls them or I call them, fine. They never do. And once they're there, they're performing and they take direction. Especially Pat and Shep. They're marvelous at it, you know. And they both turned out to be very good writers. Shep, just that last one he wrote, I thought was very good. The Vern, what's his name? Vern Berwick or whatever. Yeah.
Are there any young actors that you get a big kick out of working with?
I ran into all of them, I would say, because they're so good. You mentioned Pat Joyce. If we can get Pat's voice down half an octave, she's going to be a much better actress. But Pat's a good actress, good young actress. The most exciting young actress, I think, we've run across on Sears is Joan McCall. And Joan just can't stand listening to herself. She just thinks she sounds awful. This is a young woman who's had theatrical experience, who I think is very attractive, never did radio before, and she is an absolute natural radio actress, leading lady. She's like Jean Arthur, Barbara Luddy. You know, she has that funny little thing that happens to her voice. But we've had a lot of those. Yeah. There you are.
You brought Henry Morgan back for 3 shows. What are the chances that you're bringing something like Sam Spade, Scarlet Queen, or like a new Hawk Larrabee from the old days, but bringing it up till today?
I think if the property was important enough, it would work. I'm hesitant because I, as a person, admire what all of you do and appreciate what all of you do. And if you asked me what I did yesterday, I not only don't remember, I don't care. I have a book that I have to finish by the 3rd of September, which is on my mind right now. So that the only thing I've thought of, I think movie repeats, for the most part, don't work. I think if a show is really good, that 90% of the time, what you hear when you play it, the way it was originally done, is never going to be topped. Because a program, an entertainment, is very much a part of the moment when it was done. How everybody felt about it at that moment. It may not directly apply to headlines or to the world at that time or whatever, but it very definitely is a part of it. Everybody who did it at that time was motivated by the time in which they lived. Hawk Larrabee had some good plots, I think. I think Jack did a good job on those. And I think that it would probably be a good Western. I'm not sure how a Western goes now. We've tried a couple, and I found them disappointing. I found them cluttered, sound-wise. The plot's unclear. I don't know, they disturbed me. I think on Monday nights we did better with what I would call Americana kind of things than we did with what I would call pure Western. One thing that I would like to try, which disagrees with everything I've just said, is I'd like to get Andy Griffith and Dawes, and I don't know who the woman would be, and Billy Idelson, and do 3 Vic and Sage shows. during one of those things. Let Andy do Vic, and let Dawes do Uncle Fletcher. He sounds like him anyway. You know. And of course, Andy, who is one of the great aficionados of Vic and Sade and has a collection larger than all of your libraries, can't wait to do it. He'd love to do it. Yeah.
I'd like to see Vincent Price do something of that line, such as return to three-scale open key.
Yeah.
Great.
You know, originally what we wanted each of the guest hosts to do was also to be in a couple of the shows. And what we found out in the practical matter of producing 130 shows in 6.5 months, we were lucky that they had enough time to do their hosting chores. They just didn't have time. And to try to hit a script that fits the guest host, when you're turning out that many scripts, the script that you give to me Monday, I have to do next Monday as we get past 3/4 of the season, you know. So I don't have time to then say, well, we'll put this aside because this will be great for Vinny. We don't have that much lead time.
I just wanted to say that I remember a story called The 13th Governess. This sounded quite a bit like Sam Spade to me.
I guess it was because I'd done Spade so much when I wrote it. But when I wrote it, I wasn't thinking of Spade. And I didn't write it for radio. It was an outline that I had for a book, a simple plot outline for a younger detective who's just out of school and has just graduated from Berkeley, who opens his own office, and this is a spot he finds himself in. It was much more complicated than the version that you heard. When we started the show and we were looking for things, I thought, well, I think I'll use that for two reasons. First, it's a detective story, and we didn't want to do what High Brown is doing so very well. We wanted to do a different kind of mystery than that. So that fit, that helped in that area. And secondly, one of the bigwigs, and I don't know who, at Sears, had requested through John Beebe and Ingrid, when I was first hired for the job, that one of the great favors I could do them would be if I could find out where Howard Duff was and ask him if he would do a show. And Duff's my oldest friend. So I thought, well, hey, Howie could do the detective. So I made it a radio script and changed the line. And of course, immediately sounds like Spade. Because Duff then comes in and he started changing a couple of things, and you have Sam Spade, you know. It'd be very hard not to if you have a detective and he's got a couple of funny lines. And
I don't think that's bad.
Oh, it's not bad at all. But that's how it happened. That's the progression.
Are you writing a detective novel?
Yes, and it will be published in March by Pinnacle Books, and it's called Two Heads or Better. And the second one at the moment is called Bennett 2, because the guy's name is Bennett, and the publisher said last Thursday, what page are you on? And I said 67, and they said, it's due in September, and I said, yes, I know. And they said, what's the title for our release? And I said, Bennett 2. And they said, no, we better have lunch and talk about a title. So that's all the further that's gone. Anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, are you planning any more group comedy consultations?
I would think so, Jay. I think we should. You know, when we talked about it last time, I thought we were all half crazy, but it turned out so well, I think we ought to do, I don't know, maybe 6. It gets to be a technical thing. I think, ideally, if I had enough lead time on scripts, what I could then do would be to turn that studio around and do, let's say, 10 comedies in front of an audience. But that means that I have to have 10 comedy scripts, and I haven't recorded, during that week, I haven't recorded 9 adventures, 9 westerns, 9 mysteries, or 9 love and hates. So I have to get those caught up at some other time to still meet the air dates. Once that works out, and it worked with the 3, we finally got caught up and got things arranged again. But we had to lay back on the comedies and double up on the others to prepare for Henry being there. But I think it was worth it. I don't think there's any question about it.
Has been considered yet?
Yeah, we've talked about Stan. I'd like to work with Stan again. I used to work with him.
Also, say, developing a reoccurring character? Or...
We've talked about that. Obviously, you cannot continue to do 5 anthologies a week. There's nothing for the audience to relate to except the guest host. It's very difficult for the writers. There just aren't that many. We just got lucky that nobody got ill this year, and that people kept thinking of story outlines and stuff. what we have done, if anybody has been listening with any regularity, Ken Gerard wrote a thing that Pat Buttram did, and it worked out funny, so we did another one. So there is a second one, Fontaine Harris in Hollywood. The first one ended where they're on their way west. The second one ends where they have just bought a motion picture studio. So that there's a chance for Pat to continue with Shep doing the French leading man and Barney doing the dummy assistant and Sandy Gould doing the gal that goes with them. Pardon? Yeah. Yes, that would be good. We did a thing that, pardon?
You've got McGoofy's connection.
Right, I was going to say we did McGoofy. We did 2 of those. And then we did a thing with Daner, Alan Caillou wrote, called The Tough Guy, and that worked, so we tried another one of those. And I think what I'm trying to do without pushing it, or without even discussing it with either Sears or CBS, is that by the time we finish the second year, we should find 5 or 6 or 7 characters or groups of characters or situations that work in each category and be able to start to put those together. Because I think the way, what you were saying about Hawk, the way to do a Western is to do Hawk. Or by that I mean a character that's continuing. I'm not sure the way to do a mystery is an anthology. I think in that case, you could have 2 mysteries. You could have a cop and you could have an anthology, you know. The Love and Hate series, I think you can leave alone. There's a place for that kind of McCall, Esquire story. Comedy is always tough. We're doing an impossible task on Tuesday nights. You cannot do comedy without continuing characters or without 5 writers working on the script or without an audience, and it just suffers, and then there's no way out of it, you know. You do the best that you can. And the best that we can is that I keep telling reviewers and interviewers that this is not guffaw comedy. We're just doing what we say, well, it's funny, that's why it's on Tuesday, you know. We couldn't do Morgan. I don't think anybody would stand for it. You couldn't do Morgan every week. It's just too rich. I think Henry's good for, when I get the nerve, I'll tell him, for maybe 6 in a year. But you know, in his mind, he could do 52 if he had Al Lewis and Carol helping him. And you can't. It's just impossible. You cannot do that kind of... He was repeating himself in the 3 shows. He was doing the same jokes, same sketches, different variations on the same sketch. Yeah?
Did you listen to him on the Tom Snyder show?
No, I heard about it. Fletcher heard it and told me about it. But he said he spoke nicely of us. At least he didn't cuss us or...
Still shops at Sears.
Huh?
Still shops at Sears.
That's good. He did all the other jokes, as you know. But no, Henry's a nice man, and a very gifted man, a very talented man, and a very difficult man. He knows it better than anybody.
Complaining about the money.
If it wasn't that, it would be something else. Henry is not at a loss for something to complain about. And money is the easiest to complain about, because you say, why those cheapskates, because you're talking about Sears and CBS. But you make a mistake, that isn't what you're talking about. You're talking about radio and what radio can afford. And what radio can afford is per dollar per listener is what they figure out. And if Sears is renewed, and if that 56% that I told you continues, then it's a good investment for CBS and a good investment for Sears, and there'll be other sponsors. I've been very surprised and pleased at our middle break to hear the kind of class acts we have doing commercials. Bank of America, Cadillac, all of this kind of stuff. That's very good in there, you know. So that kind of money figures. They speak very highly of you as radio listeners, because, and I think they should. Radio listening is selective. Radio listeners as a group are more intelligent, better read, more industrious, more decent people than television people, viewers. Because no, that's the truth. Television, I don't know if you're all familiar with this, but this is true. They ran some tests on people watching television, and they discovered something that they didn't know. They thought that people listening to the radio weren't really paying attention, but that television made you pay attention. And they had it backwards. You have to pay attention to radio. You have to be intelligent. You have to be willing to participate. You have to listen. So they ran these tests, and they found out that people tuned in television, and within 4 minutes, they hadn't the faintest idea what was going on. They were looking at images. They attached them to measure their alpha waves, and television was putting them in a kind of trance. And it was marvelous relaxation. They were sitting there dreaming, and all of the little waves were going hum, and they hadn't the faintest idea. They took films, took them off the reel, changed the order of scenes, put them back on, and nobody knew the difference. They wired some sets to children so that when the child stopped paying attention to the television, it automatically turned off. The longest any child could keep television on was 2.5 minutes. That's the truth. Radio's something else again. You have to pay attention. And because you have to pay attention, you get a better quality audience, and you get people who, therefore, are also paying attention to the commercials. You ask anybody what's on, who sponsors the Monday night at the movies. I don't know who sponsors Monday night at the movies. You know, yeah.
Wasn't that the same as old-time radio programs like Ghost Radio Theater and programs of that sort?
How do you mean?
Sponsor. I mean, sponsors. I mean, like in the old days, they used like Ghost Radio Theater.
Oh, to keep their name on and everything, you mean? Oh, sure. Jack Benny and Jell-O were synonymous, you know, Jello. They used to do all of that. Then they stopped. Kraft, I think, is the only recent example that comes to mind on television. Hallmark, of course, right. Oh, yes, Kraft Music Hall for years, yeah.
Do you feel, or do you hear from your position that networks are more interested, or other people are more interested in reviving more radio?
I would guess, not being a businessman, that if I were an official, an executive at NBC or at ABC, right today, having seen what I saw yesterday, I would be with people saying, what happened to our radio network? Because if they don't move fast, they've lost it. CBS now has 2 hours a night. For sure, 2 hours a night. Well, if you're a businessman, what happened to your radio network? You know, somebody like Fred Silverman, who I don't know, has got to sit down and find out who's in charge and what happened to the radio network. Same with ABC. Mutual had the chance, as we were saying, and they blew it because they got greedy. You cannot do, what did you say? They had 15 minutes of script finally?
Yeah, it's a 25-minute show.
Well, you can't do a show like that. That's, you know, when the world is left, if there are accountants or lawyers in the room, you're excused from this comment. But you cannot leave the entertainment business in the hands of accountants and lawyers. It just cannot be done, any more than you can leave the accounting and the legal business in my hands. It just doesn't work.
But no one has talked to you directly or
I know that at the time that Sears asked me to do this show, it was not yet set on CBS. And I know there were meetings going on with the other networks, but they didn't have stations, and they were not ready to put the stations together. Now they have to. They have no choice as of this morning.
This was Sears who started this. This was
Sears came to me and said, do the show, and I got the outlines and said, here's the show, prepared a presentation, wrote a couple of things. They got to deal with CBS. But they had also had meetings with ABC and NBC, who wanted the show but could not produce a network. Now they have to, and they weren't interested in producing. They said, well, wait a while, and if you want to do it next year, we'll see if we can line up stations. But it doesn't work that way. Now they have to. This morning they have to. They don't have any chance. They can't sit around and chat anymore because they're going to be, that stuff's going to be going on all over the place. No question. Yeah.
I've noticed that there's some stations carry a Sears Radio Theater that are not part of CBS.
Yes, and I understand what happens is, from my friends at CBS, they first offer it to the CBS outlet, and if the CBS outlet quibbles in any way about the time, because Sears has the say-so about what time it's on, they have to okay it, then they have the right, CBS has the right to offer it to another station in that marketing area. In a couple of cases, I understand that's worked to our advantage. I believe that it's another station in San Diego, and it's a bigger station, isn't it? Was it KGO?
KOGO, we can hear it here.
Yeah. Incidentally, that whatever the Sacramento station is, A friend of ours who used to be an engineer at CBS, was the engineer on Broadway's My Beat, Pat Walsh, lives in Tahiti. He listens to us on the Sacramento station. He said comes in loud and clear. He don't have any problems at all.
During the winter, you can pick it up here on the Arizona. I think it's KOOL.
Oh, really?
And that at 6 o'clock here.
Yeah.
To see if I want to record it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good idea.
By the way,
You can call me. I'll tell you whether to buy it. Save you a lot of tape.
It's kind of hard to record on a cassette, on a 30-minute cassette. Do you, I haven't timed it, but do you figure, say, 10 minutes for scene one and so many minutes?
No, but I'll tell you, the middle break, we have to hit the middle break at exactly the same time.
And that's about 20 of the hour, I think.
Well, let's figure that in the script we're at about 14:40. Now, when you add whatever commercials are, the 3:30s, 3:30s, we have to hit it because of something called net sync or something. I don't know what that is. And I started to argue about it and said, I made grand speeches. We're not running a railroad, we're doing it. And got home and repeated all of this to my wife, and we had the television on, and it was a dramatic show with Hal Holbrook. I don't remember what it was. And as I was repeating this grand speech, getting all excited all over again, saying, and I said to them, and Hal Holbrook was saying on the screen in the drama, and that's why, and there was a commercial on. And I said, oh, I see what they mean. Everything is a computer. Yeah.
I've noticed that there are times when I can pick up an out-of-town station, and you hear the Sears Radio Theater, like the one that's running Albuquerque, that QOB.
I have a list in the office. I don't know all the stations, except there are 194 now.
But I've listened to it, and I get it pretty good. For some reason, I couldn't get to KNX.
You wanted to know why he gets Albuquerque better than KNX?
Where do you live?
Where you live. I live on a hill with a hill behind me, and FM signals I'm wiped out except for KNOB or KSurf, which are both in my line of vision. I can't really get any other clear FM signals. I thought I'd have no trouble with AM, but I have a great deal of trouble, and KNX really flutters where we are. I don't get it all that clearly. I think, where is that tower? Is that on Mount Torrance, the KNX tower? Well, it's just past. I'm going to have to take the hill out if I want to hear it, or listen to it at the studio. Every show will be repeated. We do the last original on Friday the 3rd of August, on Monday.
Except you've got the repeat schedule that day. Do you know why something of Baca is repeated for the
on the 3rd? Yeah, because they canceled Cataclysm. They thought it was too controversial.
So there'll actually be 129.
Right. They have Cataclysm. We did it. It's complete. But right, somebody at Sears said, no, it's controversial. So it's controversial. That's the only show out of 130 we had any discussions.
What's that about?
Fire in a nuclear plant. I don't know why they think it's controversial. I wrote it some time ago. So the strange thing about it is that when I got the job, I told them the story. I told the Sears people the story, and I said, what are your limits? And they said, well, whatever you want to do. And I said, well, here's a story that I wrote that I just got the rights back. It's been on option to NBC and to Paramount. And I told them the story. I said, it's based on a true story, and here it is. No, that's fine. Go ahead. So we got the script, no comments. Did the production, no comment. This is before 3 Mile Island. Way before. It's before China Syndrome.
Yeah, it was canceled twice. The first time was before any of this.
Right.
It was still too controversial even then. Huh?
Yeah. And I think somebody there, I don't know why Sears is sponsoring this show. Seriously. Because the one thing that a retail merchant must be very careful about is offending people. If you do 5 anthologies a week, there's got to be something in every night of the week that is offensive to somebody. Well, we're not selling toothpaste where a guy writes you a letter and says, I'm not going to use your toothpaste anymore. You're talking about somebody who's been shopping in a Sears store for 20, 25 years. You lose a valued customer. Why they take the chance, I don't know, but they have decided to take the chance. It was a terrific risk. And as I say, it looks like they're going ahead with it. Because the strange thing that they found out, and they were surprised, is that people are very nice and decent. And they've only had a few letters from people saying, I have just torn up my Sears card or something else. They've had letters from people who say, well, I didn't like that show, and I don't think you should say things like that, but I liked the one the week before, and I like the kind of show like you did last Thursday. And that's the end of it, and they stay with it, you know, which is what they should do. If you don't like it when you get into it, you can tell pretty quickly if that's your cup of tea. If it isn't, tune in tomorrow night, you know. You won't hurt anybody's feeling. Okay, I think we should wrap it up. You think? Anybody? Yes, dear.
Curious. And a person who's never had any experience writing or radio or theater or anything, get a script to you?
With a release form, sure. I bought a script that Crown Jewels of Grandemere that I told you about. Script came in the mail from a woman who said, I've done some writing. I've never written a script before. I heard your show and I went to the library and read books about how you write a radio script. She had the form pretty well. And she wrote a fantastic script. And I called her on the telephone. She's not a member of the union. I explained about joining the union or just doing one script under Taft-Hartley. Oh, it's fine, fine. She's a married lady with a grown daughter. And for me or you? And we bought the script and we produced it, and it'll be on the air in a week or so. And I called her. No, Fletcher called her after, because he directed that show, to tell her how well it had come out. And she was just in heaven. And she said, do you need a science fiction story? He said, well, we closed the store, but we may in the fall. Why? She said, I think I got an idea for a science fiction story. He said, fine. You know, there are writers all over the place. We bought a script. The Bacchus script was written by a guy who's never written a radio script, lives in Austin, Texas. And he started on a second one, which I had asked him to do, and he got stuck on it, and he called and said, is it a terrible thing if I can't finish it? And I said, no. Come over and look at my desk. I got a lot of stuff I can't finish. So we do it next year. You can do it next year. But he had never written a radio script before. Andy Nance. Pat Klepper sent a script in the mail. I didn't know who he was. And turned out he'd been writing, he used to write Grand Central Station, for heaven's sakes. He's been that much. He sent a charming script in, delightful. Turned out he was is now the entertainment editor of the St. Paul Dispatch. And so yes, we do. I did in the old days on Suspense. I bought scripts from Esley Pagostin and a lot of guys that had never written before. Sam Rolfe sent me a script in the mail. Had never written anything professional. But when they come in that way, the people have to be patient, because I haven't the time to read that quickly. I'd like to not skip read it. I'd like to read it, you know. And even if it doesn't work, be able to say something hopeful. You know. Anyway, thank you for asking me.
On behalf of the membership, Elliott, we'd like to give you this honorary membership, and that makes you an official SPERDVAC member.
I thank you. Thank you.
Also, we can get time to frame it for his monthly Mary Jane.
Oh, great. She'll be very grateful. This will make her foot better.
We also have some gifts for you.
Yes, from SPERDVAC. I know you don't have anything to play it on, but...
I'm getting one.
But the Voyage of the Scarlet Queen.
Oh, that's marvelous. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
You have something that you want to give?
I'm just going to fix it.
Ah.
Yeah, it was on paper.
Thank you.
Thank you again. You've been very nice to me.
And there you have it. Wise words and fun stories from Elliott there. Two things that still stick out to me when I listen to this and preparing to get it out to you guys. There are two things that I loved. One is how Elliott describes direction for the ear. There's like considerations across the board that they have to take into account, whether it's for a live audience or pre-recorded, that I just found fascinating. The whole issue of compression being an enemy to a great sound effect as part of that breakdown gave me a small chuckle, because it's pretty easy for us to diffuse sound or compress sound nowadays by will and not necessarily having to expect it to happen each and every single time. Also, just kind of the way he talked about how he arranges his actors. It was like interesting learning how one blocks an actor, so to speak, for the ear and not for the eye. The other line that I really like, though, too, is the producer is in charge of everything that goes wrong. As somebody who's done producing work in short films and other endeavors, I can say that is a universal truth that is summarized quite succinctly. What he doesn't mention is that there's a lot of fun in being in charge of that, so that you can try to make sure that everything's a cleared path for the directors, the writers, the actors. So he seems to take it with that same spirit, and it was really cool to hear Elliott affirm my own path in life. I hope you really enjoyed listening to Elliott as much as I did. And if you've enjoyed the time that you've had here at Behind the Dial, let us know by dropping us a line at our new Gmail account. It's behindthedialpod@gmail.com, behindthedialpod@gmail.com. Or you can rate and review the show on your favorite podcatcher. It's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you want. As always, too, if you wish to support the mission of SPERDVAC, where we're trying to preserve these interviews and the shows of classic radio, please head on over to SPERDVAC.com to learn how you can be a part of this lovely audio family. That's all for tonight, folks, and until I see you in 2 weeks, good night.